It's Easter this weekend, which, of course, is the holiest celebration for Christians, marking the crucifixion of Christ and his return from death, his resurrection 3 days later. And I think we should remember something that's usually overlooked or ignored by most of the media. Christians are the most persecuted faith, year in, year out. I mean, it's true that Jews face more hatred, but more Christians get killed. Just in the past 3 weeks, and in just Nigeria alone, another 113 Christians massacred by Islamic extremists, without any protests here in our streets or our newspapers. Joining me is the panel, Evelyn Ray, farmer, former policeman, Sky News regular, and James Macpherson from the Late Debate here on Sky News, and a former Christian pastor himself. James, the story here for years is that Christianity is dying, right? Although it's still the religion for 44% of Australians, according to the census. But new research this week I found very interesting. It says, not so fast. It is true, a lot of people who are simply raised in Christian families, not really religious themselves, did stop ticking the Christian box in the census. But nearly 800,000 people who said they weren't Christians 9 years ago said they were 5 years later, particularly older people. What does this tell you?
I think, Andrew, it tells us that secular humanism doesn't answer the very real human need for meaning and purpose. Eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die is a great way to live for a while, but eventually, when you start to reach the age of 50 or above, you start to think, is this all there is? I've got my house, I've got my car, but there's got to be more to life than simply this. And you start to think about existential things such as meaning and purpose. You start to look for a worldview that makes sense of the life you see around you and indeed of yourself. Design implies a designer. The law implies a lawgiver. Maybe there is a God, and if there is a God, clearly we're separated from him. The Christian faith teaches that Jesus came to reconnect us to God. C.S. Lewis said, even if you don't believe in Christianity, you should want it to be true. And I think these surveys show that a lot of people are exploring that and hoping that maybe there is more to life than simply accumulating a whole lot of goods that simply gather dust while you yourself are buried in the ground and your life amounts to nothing. I think none of us really want to live with our feet firmly planted in midair. We're all wanting meaning and purpose. Christianity provides that. And as you get older, you start to think about those things.
Well, your C.S. Lewis quote strikes me as absolutely true for me, even though I'm a Temu shopper, I guess. Evelyn, is Christianity dying?
Oh, absolutely not. And you know what, G.K. Chesterton, speaking of C.S. Lewis, this is another great theologian. He once said, Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it has a God who knew the way out of the grave. And I think that is so true today. But I actually think we need to start giving the younger people a little bit more credit, because a recent study out of the UK shows that there's been around a 50% increase in people attending church. I think it's something like 2 million people more have started attending. And interestingly, out of that test study, the biggest growth area was from 18 to 24-year-olds. Praise God, the younger generations are seeing sense. But I think a lot of this has to do with the shift of the death of wokeism. I think that there's a lot of momentum building behind the scenes to do with that. And like James said, he said people over 50, but I think younger people as well. We are so starved for truth. We are starved for meaning and purpose. And we are certainly starved for Christian morals. And I think the militant de-Christianization of the West has led people to kind of looking for alternatives. It's been said before that there's two options before us, Andrew. It's either Christ or it's chaos. And I think that's clearer today than we have ever seen before. And that's evident by the figures that we can see here.
I can see through my TV screen one of my viewers, Peter, is nodding wisely. He's written great books on all this. Hi, Peter. I've mentioned the debate last night on the ABC between Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. There was not one question there, James, about the cost of living crisis, but there was a question about the new religion of the wealthy left, global warming. Mm-hmm. And that was followed by more mockery of Peter Dutton on Charlie Pickering's show on the ABC. It's told in the way, of course we all here on the ABC don't like Dutton. Have a look.
Oh, hello, I'm Peter Dutton, yeah. I want to fix the housing housing prices.
He's just firing out figures and no one knows what the hell he's talking about. It's all in his imagination, and he can get overly personal with staff.
In contrast, there was only affectionate ribbing of Anthony Albanese. How does the ABC get away with this it's now shameless bias?
Yeah, well, Andrew, the ABC was established, I think, in 1932, and people needed access to media. Of course, 95 years have gone by. It's a very different world. Everybody's got news on their phone instantly, which begs the question, what is the purpose of the ABC? The ABC really don't have a purpose anymore, so they do what they please, and they can because they don't have customers that they need to satisfy. They don't have shareholders they need to reward. And so they can do as they please. In 2018, the Federal Liberal Council initiated a policy where they said the ABC should be defunded, but no coalition government has ever had the courage to follow up on it. So my complaint about Conservatives is they love to whinge about the ABC, but when they get into government, they never do anything about it. So whinge all you want. If you want to change the ABC, then win government and have the courage to defund it, privatise it, make it a subscription service. It's pretty clear what to do. Someone's just got to have the courage to actually do it.
Absolutely spot on. There was another thing today, there's a cult also of identity politics as well, Evelyn. Anthony Albanese, Assistant Minister for Women, preaching anti-Dutton hate today. Have a look.
When I put my hat on as Assistant Minister for Women, is that Peter Dutton and the Liberals do not understand the lives of particularly modern Australian families and modern Australian working women.
God, their hate campaign against Dutton is just extreme. But an obvious question, Evelyn, rarely answered. Why do we have a Minister for Women and not a Minister for Men when you've got so many female ministers and when men die younger?
Look, we don't have a minister for men for one obvious reason. It's not advantageous politically. Once women secured the right to vote, politicians had to invent a whole world of injustices against women so that they had a purpose. And of course, Andrew, they presented themselves as the remedy for these injustices. Us poor defenseless women, we couldn't survive without these good-willed politicians that were going to save us from all of our oppression. We hear this every single election time. If you vote for the other guy, you know what, women, you're going to lose all those hard-earned rights that you fought decades for. It's hard to believe that this sort of stuff is genuine when it's a privilege that's only afforded to half of the population, especially like you mentioned, Andrew, that the other half of the population is more likely to be homeless, more likely to commit suicide, murdered, suffer more social isolation, substance abuse, overdose deaths, incarceration, unreported mental health conditions, and more likely to be falsely accused of a crime. But you know what? We're not allowed to talk about that because, my goodness, the oppression of women in this country is just out of control. But you know what? I think that we've all understood for a very long time, those of us with common sense, is that women these days who say these sorts of things, particularly in political circles, they're not looking for equality. They've had that for years. They're now looking for special privilege. And it's time we start calling it exactly for what it is. It's inequality.
Well, or they're looking for a job like, I don't know, Assistant Minister for Women. That's a good job. James Macpherson, Evelyn Ray, thank you very much to you both, and have a great Easter.